It's time for this week's Parting Shots.
In the last 2 weeks, original Washington football owner George Preston Marshall's statue in front of RFK Stadium was taken down, and the franchise that Marshall owned for 37 years announced his name will be removed from its ring of fame. He's been dead 51 years, but the lingering stench of his racism grew too sour. Current owner Dan Snyder is clearly aware of what's going on, but is he paying attention? Because his legacy could be Marshall's, the steward of a team that was better at being racist than playing football. On top of naming his team a racial slur, Marshall resisted integration of his roster until 1961, before doing so at the behest of the team's landlord, President John F. Kennedy. He catered to racists, fielding all-white teams that would appease his white Southern fan base, who apparently tolerated missing the playoffs from 1946 to 1970. That is Marshall's legacy. Snyder has fielded mediocre teams for 2 decades, managing to alienate one of sports' most loyal fan bases. If nothing about Snyder changes, with no successes of his own to claim, his legacy will be his stubborn refusal to change the name of his team, even in the face of today's reckonings with racism. Washington fans wouldn't leave the team if they changed the name. Think about it. In 1987, the franchise's first black quarterback, Doug Williams, led the team to a championship. And you know who cheered him on? A lot of fans who Marshall swore 25 years earlier would never tolerate such a thing. Is Snyder so insecure he thinks his fans love racism more than his team? Maybe, but he's got 2 options. Change the name or go down as the George Preston Marshall of his day.
In 25 years of covering NASCAR racing, I've never seen a week like this one. I would argue that during NASCAR's 72 years, no one has seen a 72 hours like those that started Sunday at Talladega Superspeedway, with protests of NASCAR's ban of the Confederate flag, and then the discovery of a garage door rope pull fashioned into a noose and found in the garage stall of Bubba Wallace, the only black racer in the Cup Series. NASCAR's reaction was immediate and absolute, saying they were, quote, angry and outraged over what they called a heinous act. But that reaction was also a mistake. Not the intent, not the desire to deliver a message to that small group of NASCAR fans who want stock car racing back in the 1960s, when Talladega Superspeedway was built with the cooperation of Alabama's segregationist governor, George Wallace. And certainly not that amazing moment that NASCAR's noose reaction elicited as Wallace's competitors surrounded him in support during Monday's pre-race ceremonies. The mistake was allowing that anger and outrage to prematurely stoke fires where there was already plenty of heat. So many, including me, followed NASCAR's lead. On ESPN.com, I wrote a vicious open letter to the person or persons who left that noose for Wallace. The very next day, FBI investigators said that noose had been there at least 8 months and wasn't aimed specifically at Bubba Wallace. So during this time when our collective blood pressure runs so high around this national conversation of racial equality, let's remember to keep our emotions in check at a time when facts matter more than fear. NASCAR's taught us a lot of lessons over the last month, a lot of great lessons. Now we must add an accidental lesson to that list. Even when your heart is telling you to jump into the throttle, you still need to pump the brakes.
So, when did you guys realize that something wasn't quite right with Novak Djokovic? Was it when he came out as an anti-vaxxer? Was it when he said he believed in telepathy and telekinesis? Or was it this week? Because this week the Joker had to abort his own charity tennis tour with stops scheduled in Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia and Montenegro. He'd been fundraising, yes, but also flipping off the strict pandemic policy he criticized the US Open for enforcing. So not only did he have big crowds of unmasked fans, he had big group photos with unmasked players. He hugged Nikola Jokic, the Nuggets center, like they were gonna run a 3-legged race together. One video even shows a shirtless Djokovic dancing as an electronic voice saying, "A little party never killed nobody." Except Djokovic and Jokic and multiple players and multiple coaches all proceeded to test positive for coronavirus. So look, I know all of this is anti-science self-destruction. But what's crazy to me is that none of it even feels surprising anymore. Djokovic is not only the best player in the world right now, this dude might be the best player in the history of tennis. This is our king. Because look around. Of course he is.
If the NCAA is still clinging to the hope that its fundamental model, making huge sums of money from football and basketball without paying the athletes, is viable in the long term, this coming week might be a kind of awakening. Wednesday in Washington, the Senate Commerce Committee is holding a hearing on athlete compensation. Already, of course, pressure has been building at the state level and at the federal level to give athletes their fair share of this $14 billion industry. And at a time when Democrats and Republicans can't agree on the time of day, or for that matter, the sum of 1 + 1, there is bipartisan support for getting athletes paid. Especially now with so many Americans suffering financially, with record levels of unemployment, it would be inhumane to continue to deny athletes the opportunity to help themselves and their families. The NCAA's timeline for allowing athletes to accept compensation for the use of their name, image, and likeness won't help any of them right now. The new rules aren't supposed to go into effect for 2 years. This is a moment that demands urgent, immediate action. As Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut and Draymond Green of the Warriors wrote in a joint op-ed this week, this is also a civil rights issue. Mostly black athletes getting so little, mostly white coaches and institutions getting billions. It's time for the system to adapt, or it will wither away.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.